Hey guys, in this one I'm going to be doing a bit of clean up here and there. So first thing I'm doing is just a bit of a touch up on the leaves. I felt like they needed a bit more of a highlight just to bring them out a bit better, and I'm just going to go in there with pretty much the pure yellow that we'll be using for the highlights previously. So not a huge amount needing to be done on those, just a touch here and there on the highest ones just to bring them out. Then I'm going to be using some washers on the lower bit that's on the lower on a lower back, just to put some shading in, just to give some definition and detail. This is done using the Vallejo washers, pre-mixed basically, and I'm mixing a bit of, they have a dark brown one, and I'm mixing that in with about 50-50 with the black wash as well, just to darken it even more. And I'm going to come up into the higher areas a bit more with just the straight brown, just to give that extra bit of contrast that I think the hair just needs a little bit of. When you're working with washers, it's best off, I mean, you can flood the figure very easily because they're so liquid, so it's best off to have as little as possible on your paintbrush and work sort of a small area at a time. There's a little bit just on the bow as well, just to give some definition to some deeper areas. But you have to be very careful with washers. It's very easy to flood the model, and that's usually a very bad thing. You don't want to be doing that at all. So having done that, washers take an extremely long time to dry as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm coming in with just straight black paint, and I'm going to paint over pretty much the entire base. Essentially the job here is to make sure that there's no white anywhere to be seen on the base. I'll be coming in later on, once this has dried up, with sort of the appropriate sort of greens and browns and yellows and all that kind of thing to actually colour the base in, but this is going to work as quite a nice sort of background for it, because when I was doing the zenithal highlighting, because the base is so flat, it got quite a lot of the white on it, whereas the rest of the figure, some of it stayed with the dark grey. So this is going to provide quite a lot of the shadowing for the base, and you don't really want the base to be too bright. You want it to sort of match with the figure, but you don't want it to be so bright that it's taking attention away from the figure. So this will help sort of dull down. If you remember what I said about the sort of different primer coats that you can put on, black will give you a very muted colour scheme, and you'll probably be able to see that quite well, because I'll be using the same colours for the leaves on the base as I did for the leaves in her hair and the skirt base colour as well. So you'll be able to see the difference between the skirt, the leaves in her hair, and the leaves on the base, and you can see the difference between a black primer coat and a white primer coat. So that'll be quite nice. So that's going to take a while to dry as well. So next up, I'm going to paint up the wrap around the bow that she's holding and her glove as well. And for this I'm using a P3 paint called Rucksack Tan. I believe I show it in a minute. And I'm going to use that as a base colour, which I'll then be highlighting up again using the off-white that we've been using for the rest of the highlights. So yeah, there it is. It's quite a nice sort of yellowish brown, makes a nice base for sort of the sort of cloth wraps, if you will. Not sure you could really use it for a leathery colour. I think it's a bit too light for leather, but for sort of cloth-based wraps, it works quite well. I'm not entirely convinced that it worked on the glove either. It's a bit too close to the skin colour for my liking, so I might be changing the glove up to something darker. But again, usual thing, applying a base coat. And here you can see the zenithal highlighting we put on there works quite well, because under the arm there, under the glove, is quite dark still quite dark grey, and the rucksack tan picks that up quite nicely. So as you can see, just putting in the base colours, we're going to come back in and highlight those with the off-white, literally just mixing a bit of off-white in to give us a highlight colour, and then pretty much just drawing it on where necessary. Now as you can see here, I'm not being too careful with the highlights, because what I'm actually going to do later on is come back in with another wash, the same wash as I used on her hair. As you can see in that shot, the wash has actually dried up pretty nicely, and hasn't actually altered the colour that much, so I might go in and do it again. But the wash will help sort of redefine the colours a bit. And this was a bit of a mistake. It worked quite well on the wrap because it's quite a fine structure, not so well on the glove, going straight up to that bright highlight. So I've come back in and I'm going to work through a couple of highlight layers. Again, the area is a bit small to be sort of worrying about two brush blending. Obviously, sort of once you get better, then you want to spend a bit of time on a miniature, you can go in and sort of two brush blend those areas as well. So just a final dotting of a highlight with pretty much pure off-white at that point. So yeah, just highlighting up all the areas, bit of blending there just to make sure, and yep, just highlighting all the areas that are going to need it, top of the glove, that kind of thing. So just on that top surface there where the light's catching it, move the paint around a little bit. You want to make sure that you don't go too close to the edges, because obviously the edges have got that sort of filigree. I'll be painting that in a metallic colour. I believe on the original miniature I used a metallic yellow, sort of goldish sort of colour, which wasn't great. It kind of worked, it wasn't great though, so I might do these in plain steel metal to contrast with the rest of the figure. But now I'm just putting on a bit of a wash onto the wraps, and we can do that because they're sort of fine detail close together. It's not a flat surface essentially, so we can get away with putting a bit of a wash on and just coming back in and sort of darkening up some of the areas. You can see I've got a fairly horrendous mould line that I managed to miss. Unfortunately, because she's glued together and because it's the resin model, she's really quite delicate and it would be extremely difficult to clean that. But that just shows that you really do need to be incredibly careful when you're cleaning your miniatures, because even the slightest mould line will show up when you're painting and it will stick out like a sore thumb. So yeah, there we go, coming back in. I think that was pretty much pure black wash that was going in there, just to darken up the very deepest recesses. And yeah, getting into that bit was quite a nightmare. Would have been alright if I was left-handed, but unfortunately I'm not. So there we go. So happy so far. I think next time is probably going to be arrow feathers on the arrows, or possibly the arrow itself that's in her hand. Difficult to say really. Here you can see a good example of what happens. There you go. So I've got too much on my brush. So the way you get rid of that is you rinse the brush out, make sure it's nice and dry, and then just use it to wick up the remainder.